If your solar panels are installed in partial shade, which inverter will work better? Enphase micro-inverters or the Fronius string inverter? If you know anything about solar, you'll know the answer to this is easy. Everyone knows that Enphase micro-inverters work better in the shade. I mean, absolutely everyone in the solar industry knows Enphase is the shade solution. That's why you pay more for Enphase. But what if I told you we were all wrong? I reckon by the end of this video, I can convince you that Enphase is not the shade solution that we all thought it was. So are you ready for a solar paradigm shift? Why do we think that microinverters and optimizers work better in the shade? Well, for the last decade, these companies have done a really good job at marketing. For example, have a look at this recent Facebook post from Enphase. Did you know that most solar systems are only as productive as their weakest link? This is because all solar panels are connected to a single string inverter. I call this the kink in the hose theory. If you put in a kink in the hose, you affect the water flow in the whole hose, and you get much less water out the other end. And it turns out that this theory makes some kind of sense to an electrician. If one panel is running at only 5 amps because it is shaded, then all of the panels have to run at 5 amps, right? But it turns out it's not true. If you're a solar installer, test this for yourself. Jump up on your roof on a clear day at lunchtime. Now remember this, panels are designed to operate in 3 parts, or in 3 cell strings, which is why each panel has 3 bypass diodes. Now let's say your panel is running in the middle of the day at 300 watts. Because the panels are wired in 3 parts, then 1/3 of your panel will be running at 100 watts. Now before you shade a panel, have a look at your inverter monitoring app. It'll need to have real-time instantaneous output. Now shade one part of your panel, let's say a handprint size, and you'll lose 20 watts from your whole system. Now shade a little bit more on that cell string and you'll lose maybe 50 watts. Shade a bit more and you'll lose 70 watts. Now shade around about 40% of that cell string, and at this point the bypass diode will kick in and it bypasses that cell string. So you'll lose the complete 100 watts that cell string was producing before. But, and this is the important part, you'll never lose more than what that part of the panel was producing. So you know that theory about solar systems being only as productive as their weakest link? It's not true. So why is this? What's going on here? Well, a simple explanation is this, that inverters have maximum power point trackers. Now 20 years ago, these trackers didn't work so well, so a little bit of shade would have confused the inverter and the whole string may have been, dragged down. But inverters are getting smarter and faster at responding to changes, and they are handling shade really well. Now there is some truth that shading one part of a panel drags the whole panel down, but ironically, it applies to Enphase. Now, if you're an installer and you've got a micro-inverter system handy, try this one out. Jump up on the roof, the same thing, and shade one part of the panel, a handprint, and you'll lose 20 watts. Shade a bit more, and you'll lose 50 watts. A little bit more, and you'll lose 70 watts. Now shade that, 40% of the cell string or something, and you'll lose maybe 150 watts. A bit more, and you'll lose 250 watts. Yeah, so this is only shading one cell string with Enphase. You can drag that whole panel down, not just losing the 100 watts. So why? What's going on here? Well, my simple explanation is this. When you shade a portion of a panel, those cells become a consumer of energy rather than producers of energy. That energy in the cell will create a little bit of a hotspot or a heat in the panel. Now, if it consumes too much energy, it'll heat up the panel and damage the cell and the backsheet of the panel. So to prevent this from happening, when too much energy is flowing into the shaded area, the bypass diode will engage, and the cell string will be bypassed. However, panels on a microinverter system only have to deal with just a little bit of energy, just the power from that one solar panel or that one cell string. So there's very little danger of that panel being damaged. And if the panel is not in danger of being damaged, the bypass diode will hardly ever engage. And that's precisely the problem. Because the bypass diode does not engage, one shaded cell string will drag down the power from the whole panel. But it actually gets a little bit worse for Enphase. Enphase has got another problem. So look, a typical solar panel runs at about 30 volts. We're talking volts here, not watts. So each cell string will run at 10 volts. If a bypass diode engages, the panel will operate at around about 20 volts. If two bypass diodes engage, it would operate at 10 volts. But the Enphase microinverter needs around about 18 volts to operate. So under no circumstances can two bypass diodes engage with Enphase. Instead, if two cell strings are shaded on Enphase, the whole panel will be dragged down and operate at 10 or 20 watts. Look, if that's all a little bit too confusing, let me recap simply. On a Fronius inverter with a panel running at 300 watts, if you shade about this much of the panel, it'll run at 200 watts. Do the same with a microinverter, and it might only run at 20 watts. Now, if you shade, say, this much of a panel on a Fronius inverter, it'll run at 100 watts. On an Enphase system, it might only run at 10 watts. Now, it happens to be a lot more complicated than that. It depends on, for example, on how intense the sunlight is. So we really need to test this over a period of time. So I set up two systems up on my warehouse roof here in Brisbane, one running on a Fronius inverter and one running on Enphase. And then I shaded 4 panels on each system with random cutout shapes of core flute, which I clamped to the side of the panel. In total, the system loss due to shade was around about 15%. Now, I used solar analytics to monitor the output of both systems. So far, I've monitored the systems for several weeks, but here is a snapshot of the results. On a sunny day, Fronius outperformed Enphase by about 3.5%. Note that Fronius works better on the sunny days because in full sun, the bypass diodes can engage. And on an overcast day, Enphase outperformed Fronius by about 2%. Enphase seems to work a little bit better on overcast days, and Fronius seems to work a fair bit better on sunny days. Now, there are a lot of caveats around what I'm saying here. There are some situations where Enphase will work better. So if you have parallel strings with uneven shade across those strings, or if you have just 5 kilowatts of panels on a 5 kilowatt inverter, so the power ratio is low, or if your string lengths are really short, then Enphase will have a slight advantage over Fronius. But if the roof that you are working with allows for a half reasonable design with Fronius, then Fronius will work as well than Enphase, if not better, in many shaded situations. So let's recap on what I'm claiming here. In my tests, Fronius works better than Enphase with 15% shade. That's crazy. If this video has raised more questions than it has answered for you, then hit subscribe on the button down below. There's so much more that I'm covering, and I'm testing new scenarios every day. I've got a whole lot more interesting test results coming. For example, how much shade is too much shade? Do Tigo optimizers help Fronius work even better? And how does SMA and SunGrow compare to Fronius? So what do you reckon? Are you as surprised as I was about these results? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're there, give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. I'll catch you next time.